I am 74 years old and a widow. For more than 4 decades, this house was the life my husband and I built together, board by board, memory by memory. When he passed, the silence in these rooms was so complete that I could almost hear the echoes of his footsteps. My daughter, Lily, and her husband, Connor, moved in not long after the funeral, saying they wanted to take care of me. At the time, their presence felt like a lifeline. Before they arrived, my oldest friend Miles, who also happens to be my lawyer, advised me to transfer the deed to Lily but to keep a special clause. It guaranteed me the right to live here for the rest of my life, and if my dignity was ever compromised, the property would automatically revert to me. I signed it thinking it was only a formality, never imagining I would need it. Tonight, after dessert, the air in the dining room shifted. Connor leaned toward Lily and whispered something I could not hear, but I saw the way her eyes hardened. She turned to me with a smile that did not reach her face and said, "You should step away now, Mom. Let the younger ones talk about the house." I put down my coffee cup and felt the weight of her words settle on me. In that moment, I realized something was slipping out of my grasp, something more precious than the deed or the walls around me. When I walk through this house, I am not simply moving from one room to another. I am moving through a map of my life, a private museum where every wall, every piece of furniture, every creak in the floor holds a story. I have lived here for so long that the smell of the wood in the hallway still carries faint traces of the varnish my husband applied himself the year we moved in. The sunroom on the east side catches the morning light exactly the way it did when he would drink his first coffee, reading the paper before work. Even now, if I close my eyes, I can hear the rustle of the pages and the sound of him clearing his throat before commenting on the headlines. The living room is where we hosted our first Christmas after the mortgage was paid off. We could not afford new furniture at the time, but we polished the old set until it shone, and Yvonne arranged flowers from her garden in an old ceramic vase. That vase still sits on the mantel, and every time I dust it, I can picture her kneeling in the garden, her hands in the soil, humming softly to herself. The rug beneath my feet is worn in the center where people have stood for years, talking, laughing, celebrating, and sometimes grieving together. The kitchen is the soul of this home. My husband and I spent countless Sunday mornings here making pancakes for Lily when she was little. I remember how she would sit on the counter swinging her legs, her hair a tangled mess, trying to steal blueberries from the bowl before they went into the batter. The old oak table, scratched and dented, is not just a table to me. It is where school projects were spread out, bills were paid, birthday cakes were sliced, and hard conversations were had. Upstairs, our bedroom still carries the faint scent of her perfume. The quilt on the bed is one she stitched herself, with mismatched patches from old clothes, each one holding a piece of our past. The closet is filled with coats and dresses I could never bring myself to give away. It is not just fabric hanging there. It is decades of shared life folded into every seam. Even the smallest corners matter. The narrow hallway upstairs, with its slightly crooked picture frames, holds photographs from every stage of Lily's life. Her first day of kindergarten, the awkward teenage years, her graduation day. Those frames are not just decoration. They are the spine of our family history. The back porch is where my husband used to sit in the evenings, nursing a glass of iced tea while listening to the crickets. The wood planks out there are worn from his chair legs sliding back and forth over the years. The garden beyond the porch is another chapter. My husband planted roses along the fence for our 10th anniversary. He said they would outlive us both, and so far he was right. Every spring they bloom again, a stubborn reminder of his faith in lasting things. I still prune them myself, even when my hands ache from arthritis, because it feels like tending to him in some small way. To anyone else, this might seem like an ordinary house, but to me, it is the physical embodiment of every joy and hardship we shared. It is the place where I learned to be a wife, a mother, and eventually a widow. Every object has weight, every room has a pulse. That is why when something is moved, replaced, or taken away, it feels like more than just a change in decor. It feels like a wound. I have always believed that the dignity of a person is tied to the space they live in. This house is not simply where I sleep and eat. It is where I exist as the sum of all my years. To preserve it is to preserve myself. To lose it, or to have it altered beyond recognition, would be to erase the story of my life one detail at a time. And that is why every time I see Connor's assessing eyes scan a room, or hear Lily suggest that something should be updated, I feel a tightening in my chest. They may see walls and floors, but I see the marrow of who I am. When my husband passed, the grief was so heavy that I could hardly think about the future. The house felt too big for one person, but the idea of leaving it was unthinkable. I had no plan except to live each day as it came. Then Lily suggested that she and Connor could move in, help with the upkeep, and make sure I was not alone. At first, it sounded like kindness. I wanted to believe it was kindness, but before agreeing, I called Miles. He had been my friend for over 40 years and my lawyer for just as long. Miles is the kind of man who reads every line of a contract twice, the kind who notices what is missing more than what is written. When I told him about Lily's proposal, he was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Edgar, if you do this, do it carefully. Too many people give away their home and end up with nothing, not even a say in their own living conditions." I protested at first. This was my daughter we were talking about. She had been raised in this house, loved in this house. She would never betray me. Miles listened without interrupting, but I could hear the skepticism in his breathing. "Edgar," he said finally, "love does not always survive the weight of property and money. Even good people can change when they think they have the upper hand." He suggested that if I really wanted to transfer ownership to Lily, we should build in a clause that would protect me, a right of occupancy for the rest of my life, non-transferable and non-negotiable. More than that, a condition that if my right to live here in dignity was violated in any way, the house would revert to my ownership automatically. No lawsuits, no bargaining, no loopholes. I hesitated. It felt almost insulting to think I might need such protection from my own daughter. But Miles pressed on. "It is like insurance," he explained. "You hope you never need it, but you will be glad it is there if the worst happens." He even used the phrase Chekhov's gun, though he is no playwright. If you put a safeguard in place, you should accept that it might one day be used. So I agreed. We drew up the transfer papers, and Miles spent hours crafting that one paragraph until it was watertight. The wording was precise. If I were forced to live in unsuitable conditions, if my access to parts of the house were restricted, or if I were physically removed from my room or the property without my consent, the deed would return to me instantly. No appeal. No delay. When Lily came to sign, she skimmed the pages quickly. I do not think she read that clause in detail. Connor took longer, scanning the legal language, but in the end he signed too. I remember thinking at the time that it was only a safeguard for an event that would never come. My daughter would not treat me in a way that triggered it, but Miles' words stayed in the back of my mind. Love does not always survive the weight of property and money. I told myself he was just being cautious, the way lawyers are, yet something deep down understood the wisdom in his warning. This house was more than timber and brick. It was power, security, and memory all bound together. Whoever controlled it would hold more than just a title deed. Looking back, I can see that the day I signed those papers was the day I set the stage for everything that followed. The clause was my lifeline, invisible to everyone else, but always there, ready to be pulled if I ever felt the ground giving way beneath me. At the time, I prayed I would never have to touch it. I wanted it to remain just words on paper, quietly sleeping in Miles' office. But like the loaded gun on a shelf in a story, once it was there, the question was never if it would be used, but when. It began so quietly that if I had not been paying attention, I might have missed it. At first, I told myself these were harmless adjustments, the kind of changes people make when they settle into a place. But little by little, the familiar texture of my home began to thin, as though someone were rubbing away the surface until only a faint outline remained. One afternoon, I walked into the living room and saw Connor holding the old brass clock my husband had bought at a flea market in our first year of marriage. It had never kept perfect time, but its slow, deliberate ticking had been the background music of our evenings for decades. Connor turned it in his hands, smiling in that way people do when they are about to make a suggestion they believe to be harmless. "This thing is charming," he said, "but it is a bit of an eyesore. We could replace it with something more modern." I managed a polite smile, but inside something tightened. To me, that clock was not an object. It was a witness to half a century of life. The next day I noticed a framed photograph missing from the mantel. It was one of my favorites. My husband in the garden, squinting into the sun, his hands dirty from planting roses. I found it in a cardboard box in the storage room. Lily's handwriting on the side read Family Miscellaneous. When I asked her about it, she said she was just decluttering, that she wanted the living room to feel more open. I nodded, but my chest felt heavy. Decluttering, in this case, meant erasing pieces of my life. A week later, my old armchair disappeared. It was a sturdy piece of furniture, worn smooth in places where I had sat to read the paper every morning for years. Connor explained that it was too bulky and interrupted the flow of the new layout. He gestured toward a sleeker, modern chair in the corner and assured me it was more comfortable. It was not. It was a chair you sat in for appearance, not for living. I did not argue, but I felt as though a part of my daily ritual had been stripped away. Even small things began to change. The quilt my husband's mother had made for us was folded and put into storage. The kitchen shelves were rearranged so my favorite mug was no longer in its usual spot. The record player, once a fixture in the living room, was moved upstairs because, as Lily put it, no one listens to records anymore. Every one of these changes was small enough to dismiss on its own. If I had complained, I would have sounded petty. But taken together, they formed a pattern. They were not just rearranging furniture or redecorating. They were rewriting the story of the house, removing my fingerprints one by one. I began to realize that space is more than physical. It is the territory of memory, habit, and identity. By changing where I sat, what I looked at, and what I touched each day, they were changing the way I lived. And the worst part was that they did it under the pleasant banner of improvement. Who could argue with making a room brighter or a layout cleaner? Yet every object they moved or removed was a thread in the fabric of my life. When enough threads are pulled, the fabric weakens. I could feel that weakening in the way I hesitated before entering the living room, unsure what would be missing next. I could feel it when I stopped correcting them, letting the changes happen because I was tired of the explanations. It was only later that I understood these were not random acts. They were the opening moves in a quiet game of possession, and the prize was not just the house itself, but the authority to decide what belonged here and what did not. They were redrawing the borders, and I was being slowly pushed to the edges. The next phase of change did not come with boxes or missing furniture. It came quietly, disguised as small adjustments to how the household ran. At first, they were presented as conveniences, little tweaks to make life smoother for everyone. But convenience for them slowly became confinement for me. Dinner had always been at 6 o'clock in this house. It was not a rule so much as a rhythm, a point in the day when we came together. After Lily and Connor moved in, the time shifted. 7 o'clock, then 7:30, sometimes even 8. Connor explained that it worked better for their schedules, that it gave him time to get home from the office without rushing. I agreed at first, thinking it was harmless. But I found myself eating alone more often, my plate reheated in the microwave. The shared meal, once a daily anchor, was becoming an afterthought. The kitchen, too, began to change in ways that unsettled me. Connor and Lily reorganized it one weekend while I was out for a walk. The pots and pans I had reached for in the same place for decades were moved to new cupboards. My husband's old cast iron skillet, heavy and seasoned with years of use, ended up in the basement because, as Connor put it, it did not match their cooking style. My favorite corner by the window, where I used to drink my morning tea, was taken over by a sleek coffee machine and a cluster of decorative mugs that looked nice but were never used. Even my morning ritual with the newspaper became a point of tension. I had always read it at the kitchen table while the light was still soft, pen in hand to circle articles worth remembering. One morning, I found the paper still in its plastic sleeve on the counter, unopened. Lily told me she had canceled the delivery. "We can read the news online now, Mom," she said. "No more clutter on the table." I tried to explain that it was not about the news. It was about the feel of the paper, the sound of the pages turning. But she only smiled as if indulging a child's stubbornness. The most obvious shift, though, was in where I was expected to spend my time. One afternoon, Connor mentioned that the living room was becoming crowded during the evenings. They had set up a new television and wanted to keep the space open for their friends when they visited. He suggested that I might enjoy the sunroom instead. "It is quieter there," he said, "more your speed." At first, I thought nothing of it. The sunroom had a pleasant view of the garden, and I did enjoy the light during the day. But in the evenings, once the sun went down, it became cold and dim. I realized quickly that this was not a suggestion but a redirection. When they were in the living room, I was in the sunroom. What troubled me most was the way these changes blended together. A shifted dinner hour meant fewer shared meals. A rearranged kitchen made me less inclined to cook. The removal of the newspaper stripped away a small but meaningful ritual. Being guided into the sunroom meant losing the comfort of the central space in my own home. None of these things were framed as restrictions, but that was what they became. Space is not only about walls and doors. It is about where you feel welcome, where you feel you belong. As the weeks went on, I realized my territory was shrinking. I was still in the house, but I was no longer at the heart of it. My world had been reduced to a few sanctioned corners, and the rest felt subtly off-limits. This was no longer about replacing a clock or moving a chair. This was about moving me. It began with glances, quick measuring looks that passed between Lily and Connor when I forgot a word mid-sentence or paused too long before answering a question. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but soon those looks became whispers, and the whispers turned into a tone of voice I recognized all too well. It was the tone people use when speaking about someone who is slipping, someone whose mind is beginning to wander. I overheard the first real conversation by accident. I had come into the kitchen earlier than usual and found them standing close together, their voices low. "She is getting more forgetful," Connor said. "Yesterday she asked me twice what day it was." Lily made a small sound, part agreement, part concern. I stood just out of sight, my hands curling into fists. Twice, I thought. Once in the morning, once in the evening. That was not forgetfulness, it was conversation. The next day I decided to test my suspicion. At lunch, I deliberately dropped my fork. As I bent to pick it up, I caught the flicker of a glance between them. That night, I pretended to misplace my glasses, asking Lily if she had seen them. I knew perfectly well they were on my nightstand. She told me she had seen them there earlier. The following morning, I left the bathroom light on and the radio playing when I went to bed. I wanted to see if they would notice. They did. At breakfast, Connor leaned back in his chair and said casually to Lily, "Do you think your mother should see a doctor? I have noticed a few troubling signs." Lily frowned, clearly unsettled. "What kind of signs?" "Forgetfulness, coordination problems," Connor replied, his tone just light enough to sound like casual concern. He ticked off my incidents from the past day, every one of them planted by me. It might have ended there if I had not overheard them again that afternoon. From my room, I could hear Connor in the kitchen, speaking in that same measured tone. "These are classic early signs of dementia," he said. "It can progress quickly at her age. Before long, she could be a danger to herself." Lily's voice was uncertain, but she did not dismiss the idea. That was when the shape of their plan began to emerge in my mind. They were not just talking about my quirks or habits. They were building a case, a quiet, steady case to have me declared in need of care. And care, in their definition, meant a nursing home. Not just any home, but the cheapest option they could find. I had seen the brochures on Connor's desk. Affordable, minimal amenities, basic services only. The kind of place where people are stored rather than looked after. I could almost admire the subtlety. If you tell enough small stories about someone's forgetfulness, if you present enough little slips as evidence, eventually others will believe it. And if the person in question is 74 and widowed, it is not a hard story to sell. But they had made one mistake. I was not drifting away. My mind was clear, my memory intact. And now I knew they were setting a trap. Every glance, every note in the margin of a brochure, every offhand remark about my well-being was another step toward their goal. They thought they were being careful. They thought I would never see it coming. But I had spent a lifetime reading people's intentions, sometimes in my work, sometimes at my own dinner table. And I knew exactly what they were doing. It was a Thursday evening when they finally laid out the next step in their plan, though they wrapped it in soft words and smiles. Dinner had been strangely cheerful that night, almost forced. Lily served my favorite stew, Connor poured me a glass of wine, and the air was thick with the kind of politeness that always precedes bad news. Partway through the meal, Connor set down his fork and said, "We have something to tell you." He glanced at Lily, who gave me what she must have thought was a reassuring smile. "We are going to start some renovations," he continued. "The second floor needs updating, fresh paint, new floors, maybe some structural work. It will make the house more comfortable for everyone." I asked the question I knew they hoped I would avoid, including my room. Lily hesitated just for a second, then nodded. "Yes, Dad, yours too." "And where exactly will I be staying during this renovation?" I asked, though my voice was calm, my eyes steady. "There is a small room downstairs," Lily said quickly, "next to the laundry area. It will only be for a little while," she added, as if the speed of her answer might convince me. I knew the room she meant. It had no windows, only a small vent near the ceiling that rattled when the dryer ran. The air was always slightly damp from the laundry, and in winter, the cold from the north wall seeped in no matter how high the thermostat was set. It was a storage space, not a bedroom. The idea of sleeping there for even a night was unpleasant. The idea of moving there indefinitely was unthinkable. Connor must have sensed my resistance. "We will make it cozy," he said. "A fresh coat of paint, a new bed, a heater. It will be fine. And once the renovation is done, we will see how the space upstairs can be used more efficiently." More efficiently. I had learned to listen closely to his choice of words. In his language, efficiency meant less room for me, more for them. I thought of the clause Miles had drafted, the guarantee that I could live in dignity for the rest of my life, and that any violation of that right would return the house to me. This was not just a matter of preference. It was a direct challenge to that clause. Still, I said nothing then. I simply nodded, took another sip of wine, and let them believe I was thinking it over. Inside, the calculation had already begun. Moving me into that room, even temporarily, could easily be framed as unsuitable living conditions. No natural light, constant noise from the drier, damp air. This was not accommodation, it was displacement. They wanted it to seem harmless, temporary, even thoughtful, but I could see the truth under the wrapping. Temporary solutions have a way of becoming permanent when it benefits the people in control. And if I agreed to move into that room, even for a short while, I might never see my bedroom again. That night, I lay awake in my bed, listening to the familiar creaks of the house, the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the quiet safety of a space that had been mine for decades. I imagined the sound of the dryer thumping against the wall of that small room, the stale air pressing in, the knowledge that this temporary move was simply the next step toward removing me altogether. And for the first time, I allowed myself to think not just about resisting, but about winning. It happened faster than I expected. One moment we were at the dinner table, the three of us picking at our food in uneasy silence, and the next, Connor leaned toward Lily and murmured something I could not catch. I watched her face change, soft features tightening, her eyes narrowing the way they did when she was trying to sound decisive. She set down her fork, looked straight at me and said, "If you do not like the room we prepared, you can sleep out on the back porch." The words landed like a stone in my chest. There was no trace of hesitation in her voice, no hint that this was a joke. I could see Connor leaning back in his chair, his expression calm, almost satisfied. I knew better than to argue in that moment. I simply pushed my plate away, stood up, and went to my bedroom to collect a few things: a blanket, a pillow, a small bag with essentials. The back porch was never meant for sleeping. It was an open space with only a thin roof and wire screens to keep out the insects in summer. In winter, the wind cut through it like a blade. That night it was neither summer nor winter, but the air was cool enough to seep into my bones. I set up my cot in the corner, the one place least exposed to the breeze, and sat there for a long time listening to the muffled clatter of dishes from the kitchen. It was humiliating, but at the same time I felt a quiet sense of clarity. This was not a misunderstanding or a small shift in living arrangements. This was eviction, pure and simple, just dressed in the language of impatience. And the best part, in a grim sort of way, was that I had not orchestrated it. The first witness came early the next morning. Ray, the postman who had been delivering mail here for years, stepped onto the porch with a small package in his hand. He stopped short when he saw me sitting on the cot. "Mr. Thornberry," he asked, looking puzzled, "did you spend the night out here?" I told him yes, that the house was undergoing some changes, and left it at that. His eyes lingered on the blanket and pillow before he nodded slowly and handed me the package. Later that morning, Mrs. Pratt, the church-going woman from down the street, stopped by with a basket of muffins. She had heard I had been feeling under the weather and thought to bring something warm. When she saw me on the porch, her eyebrows rose. "Out here?" she asked. I smiled thinly and told her it was temporary. She frowned in a way that told me she was filing the sight away in her mind, perhaps to share at the next coffee morning with her friends. By midday, the gardener arrived, an old acquaintance who had been tending to the lawn since before Lily was married. He walked around back to check the tool shed and stopped dead when he saw me sitting on the cot with a cup of tea. "What are you doing out here?" he asked. I shrugged and said, "Just taking in the air." He gave me a long, assessing look, the kind of look a man gives when he knows the story is bigger than the one being told. By the time the day ended, 3 separate people, none of whom I had summoned, had seen me sleeping or sitting out on the porch. Each had noticed my makeshift bed, the blanket folded at the foot, the look on my face that I could not completely mask. I realized then that these accidental witnesses were worth more than any statement I could prepare myself. They had no reason to lie, no connection to the legal clause hidden in the deed, and no idea they were walking into the middle of a quiet war. They would remember what they saw because it was unusual, unsettling, and out of place. That night, as I lay under the thin roof of the porch listening to the distant hum of the dryer inside, I understood something important. In trying to push me to the edges of the house, Connor and Lily had moved me into the open, not just physically, but in plain view of the people who could confirm exactly what was happening. They thought they were isolating me. In reality, they were giving me the strongest defense I could ask for. From the moment I realized that Lily and Connor's actions had crossed a line, I knew I could not afford to rely on memory alone. Words can be twisted, recollections questioned, but records, cold, objective records, speak for themselves. I began keeping a small notebook by my side at all times. It fit neatly into my shirt pocket so that it was always within reach, ready to capture each detail while it was still fresh. I wrote everything down with precision. The exact time Lily told me to move to the porch, the temperature when I lay down that first night, the number of hours I spent without access to the kitchen. I noted when Connor passed by without acknowledging me, when the back door was locked from the inside, and when I could hear them laughing in the living room while I sat outside. Photographs became another form of testimony. I took a picture of the porch cot with my blanket folded on top, of the single extension cord that powered the small lamp I used to read, of the thermometer showing how cold it had been at dawn. I snapped images of the small room by the laundry that they claimed was ready for me. A cramped space with no windows, the wall damp to the touch, and the constant background thump of the dryer. One evening when I returned from the grocery store, I found my bedroom door locked. I stood there in the hallway, key in hand, turning it uselessly in the knob. The lock had been changed. I took a picture of that too, close enough to show the fresh metal of the new latch. Later, I wrote in my notebook, 6:42 p.m., bedroom door locked. No explanation given. Slept on porch. I also recorded sounds. The steady mechanical thud of the dryer running late into the night, loud enough to make sleep difficult, was captured on a small handheld recorder Miles had once given me as a gift. I even took a short video to show how close the laundry room was to the so-called temporary bedroom they had chosen for me. In the recording, you could hear the machine rumble and feel the vibration through the floorboards. I was careful never to provoke them into doing anything that could be seen as staged. If I had been locked out of my bedroom, it was because they had done it of their own accord. If I slept outside, it was because they had suggested it plainly. My notes were not accusations, they were simple statements of fact, stripped of emotion. Date, time, event. No more, no less. By the end of that first week, the notebook was filling quickly. I made 2 copies, one to keep in my pocket, the other hidden in a shoebox in the back of the hall closet. I knew that if things came to a legal fight, Connor would not hesitate to search for anything that might weaken my case. The photographs I saved to a memory card, which I kept taped beneath the top drawer of my desk. Each entry, each image, was another brick in a wall of evidence that could not be ignored. They were not just inconveniences, they were breaches of dignity, violations of the agreement Miles had so carefully written into the deed. And though I had not yet called him to set the clause in motion, I knew I was building the foundation for that moment. What they did not understand was that I was no longer just enduring their treatment. I was documenting it piece by piece, until the picture was so clear that even the most stubborn judge could not look away. The night I chose to act, I made sure everything was in order. The documents Miles had prepared sat neatly in a folder, their edges perfectly aligned. In one stack was the formal notice to activate the clause returning the house to my ownership. In the other was the eviction notice, granting them the legally required 30 days to vacate. Both were signed, dated, and backed by every piece of evidence I had gathered over the past weeks. I waited until they had sat down to dinner. The smell of roasted chicken filled the kitchen, and the table was set with an attention to detail that almost felt theatrical. Lily poured wine into 3 glasses, her voice light but forced, as if she were trying to smooth over the tension of recent days. Connor carved the chicken with slow precision, the knife scraping softly against the plate. I took my place at the table and let them settle into the rhythm of eating before I reached for the folder. Without raising my voice, I slid it onto the table between us. "I have something for you," I said. Connor looked at the folder as if it were a piece of rotting food. "What is this?" "It is the formal activation of the clause in the deed," I said. "The one that returns the property to me if my right to live here in dignity is violated." 3 nights on the porch in the cold, a locked bedroom, and an offer to move me into a windowless storage room fit the definition exactly. Lily set down her fork, her hand trembling slightly. "Dad, "Wait," she began, but Connor was already opening the folder, his eyes scanning the pages. His face shifted from disbelief to fury in a matter of seconds. "This is absurd," he snapped. "You cannot just take the house back." "I can," I said evenly. "The clause was written precisely for this situation. It is legally binding." Lily's eyes flicked from Connor to me, her voice breaking. "Dad, please, we can fix this. We will stop the renovations. You can stay in your room." I met her gaze, calm but unyielding. 30 days, or 60 if you stop all interference immediately and agree to leave the house as it is until I say otherwise. Connor's knuckles whitened around the papers. "This is manipulation," he spat. "You planned this." "No," I replied. "I hoped I would never need to use it, but you made your choices. I am making mine." Lily reached across the table, her eyes pleading now. "I am your daughter. And I am the man who built this home," I said. "I will not live in it as a guest in my own life." For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. Connor shoved the papers back toward me, but I did not move them. They sat in the center of the table like a line drawn in the sand. The balance in the room had shifted. They could no longer treat me as an old man clinging to the past. I was no longer reacting to their plans. I was dictating the terms. The choice was theirs now, but the power was mine. In the weeks that followed, the house grew quiet in a way I had not heard before. Not the warm quiet of early mornings with Ivan, but a stillness weighted with unspoken words. Lily and Connor moved through the rooms carefully, speaking to me only when necessary, their voices clipped and formal. We had reached an agreement, 60 days for them to leave if they stopped all interference. But it was not a truce born of peace. It was a countdown. During that time, I met with another lawyer, one who specialized in estate planning. The decision had been forming in my mind since the night on the porch. I revised my will, where once Lily had been set to inherit the house and the majority of my assets. I now directed that most of my estate would go to a foundation supporting elderly people who had suffered mistreatment or coercion by their own families. It was not an act of revenge. It was a statement of values, my way of ensuring that what I had built in life would stand for the dignity I fought to keep. When I signed the final documents, the pen felt heavier than I expected. The law can protect property, but it cannot restore trust. No paper could undo what had been said and done in these rooms. One afternoon, about 2 weeks before their departure, Lily knocked on my study door. In her hands was a small cardboard box. "I found these in my things," she said, her voice quiet. It was filled with photographs of Ivan, some framed, some loose, spanning decades. Our wedding day, her tending the roses, laughing with Lily as a child. "I thought you should have them back." I took the box, feeling the weight of more than just paper and ink. "Thank you," I said. She lingered a moment, then asked, "Can we talk? Not about the house, about us." I waited. "I know you changed your will," she said. "I am not asking for money, I want time to understand how we ended up here." Her eyes searched mine, looking for something I could not give right then. I had spent months defending my right to live with respect in the home I built. I had won that battle, but in doing so, I had crossed a point of no return with my only child. "Time," I said finally, "is something we both need." She nodded, and after a long pause left the room. The day they moved out, the sun was bright and the air smelled faintly of roses from the garden. Connor avoided my eyes as he loaded the last box into the car. Lily stood on the porch for a moment as if trying to memorize something. Then she gave a small, uncertain wave before following him. When the sound of the car faded, I stood in the doorway of my house, alone again. I had the keys, the deed, the photographs, and the space to live on my own terms. But the comfort of believing that blood alone could be a bond, that was gone. That night, I sat in the living room with a glass of whiskey and the box of photos. The house felt like mine again. My dignity was intact. My legacy was clear. But the price had been the last fragile thread connecting me to my daughter. It was a victory, yes, but one that would never taste sweet. I sit on the back porch, the same place they once told me to sleep, and watch the sun sink low over the garden my husband planted. The roses catch the last of the light, their petals glowing as if they are holding onto the day for just a moment longer. The air is cool, the kind that carries the faint smell of soil and leaves, and the house behind me is still. There is no sound of quiet conversations in the next room, no whisper passed between my daughter and her husband, no subtle shifting of the air that tells me I am being discussed. The silence now is different. It is not the silence of exclusion, but of peace. I have walked through months of small humiliations and careful planning, through the slow erosion of space and dignity, and I have come out the other side with both intact. I did not win by shouting or by trying to match their schemes in cruelty. I won by holding the line, by knowing exactly where my boundaries were and refusing to let them be crossed. This house is still mine, not just in the eyes of the law, but in the way it breathes when I walk through it, in the way each corner still holds the life I built here. Maybe one day Lily will come back, not to take, not to manage, but to visit as a daughter again. Maybe she will knock on this door as someone who understands what she nearly destroyed. I do not know if that day will come. For now, I stay here with the home I protected, the garden my husband's hands shaped, and the quiet company of my own thoughts. I am exactly where I am meant to be, still standing, still myself.